hype man, Raj Nation, the GOAT to market. From Hype HQ in Chicago, Illinois, Startup Hype Man presents the GOAT to Market Show. What's up, everyone? I am your host, Raj Nation, the founder and chief pitch artist of Startup Hype Man. This podcast is where we bring you founders, company leaders, and creatives who are building it, who are doing it, who have been there and done that. And they pull back the curtain on their go-to-market strategies so that you can build a venture that you love and become the GOAT of your industry. Want first listen on episodes before anyone else? Subscribe to our newsletter at startuphypeman.com. You will get alerts every Sunday morning when we release new episodes. All right, let's hear how today's guest is becoming the GOAT. Ladies and gentlemen, making his way to the microphone from New Delhi, India, and currently residing in both New Delhi and San Francisco, California, he is the head of marketing at StoryLane. Give it up for Madhav Bhandari.
That's an amazing introduction, man. Like, so great to be here.
Take that intro anytime you enter a conference room from here on out. All right, friends, like I mentioned, he is Madhav Bhandari, the head of marketing at StoryLane. StoryLane's a company, a B2B SaaS company that allows you to customize your demos, of course, as everything these days is, with the help of AI. They've had a pretty good run these last few years. They've been able to scale their revenue from 800K to They've been able to scale from 900K to 8 million in 3 years. I got to make sure I got the actual numbers right there. 900K to 8 million in 3 years. And in that process, they've had a lot of success with several different marketing strategies and sales strategies that Madhav has spearheaded and been able to implement. Some with lots of success, some that they tested and realized maybe didn't work so well. We're going to unpack a lot of those different ones, but kind of what's bringing all of that together is something that Madhav's really espoused in a lot of his content, which is using your product as a means to sell your product to your customers. Madhav, once again, welcome to the show. And why is this on your mind? Why is it important to you? The idea of using your product to sell your product.
Yes, of course. I mean, so I've been in B2B SaaS for almost about 13, 14 years. And, I think initially when I started, I remember this founder telling me that, it's just so easy to market a product when you're sort of dog fooding it yourself. And that was a big thing, 2012, 2013, dog fooding your own product and everything. So, yeah, I think it was just, and the nature of our product, I'm actually lucky in a way is that we sell to marketers and sales, right? So I'm in a way sort of selling to myself. And if I'm selling to myself, there's a lot of things that I can sort of do to sort of, share how we're sort of using the product, right? So, and it just becomes a lot more easier and natural to sort of do it. I don't think it was any sort of focused effort. It was just more how, what are some unique ways that we can sort of promote our product and just, we just started uncovering more and more use cases, just using it internally and sort of sharing it out. And that strategy has been working well so far. That's the honest truth.
We're going to unpack that a whole lot more and everything and kind of the ancillary parts of that as well. Before we go there, let's learn a little bit more about you, Madhav, the person. You are a new dad. Talk about the difference in, honestly, your approach towards work and your approach towards life in your dad era versus your pre-dad era.
Man, thank you so much for asking that question, actually. But I think it's right now at this point, there's just two things in my life. There's parenting and there's work. There's nothing else apart from that. So it's, it is a little bit hard, but also I feel like I've, for weird reason, it's just the whole sort of prioritization when you're sort of parenting, especially when you're sort of at home, supporting. That way, it actually translates back to work as well. So I was always good at saying no, but like now I've become insanely sort of rude in terms of saying no. And that actually is, I guess, getting better results. So yeah, I mean, like, I think from that's I think that's been the major change, I would say. Since then, of course, there's like the whole life is turned upside down, and yeah, and I'm really enjoying it, and I'm glad. Like I'm really happy that I'm able to have like 2-3 hours of intense work, and then just go to the next room and just be with my baby. That's a beautiful sort of luxury when you're remote.
With that getting better at saying no. So, it's something that I've refined over the years. I think I still have long ways to go. I'm from Chicago. I live in Chicago, which kind of means I have what they call Midwest nice. And you're always trying to be like polite with your declines or really any aspect you can. So any like specific sound bites or ways now that, you said you're just kind of getting more direct with it. Is it literally just no, or are there specific, I don't know, go-to phrases that you have?
I mean, I think anytime somebody wants to schedule a call, there's always two things, right? Like one is like, can you give more context? Does it even really need a call? And then the second thing is, can it be sort of done async? It's just those two things always. Like, I mean, it's with the internal team as well as sort of externally anybody, right? And I think I would say at this point right now, like 8 or 10 times, I would just say no to a call. I would be like, we can just exchange voice notes or something. So yeah, I think it's primarily that. Just like the nature of my work right now is there's a lot of meetings in my work basically. So I just got to be really mindful. And then yeah, I think that's and then yeah, it's just these two questions. I don't say just no blatantly, but just like give me a reason why this is worth sort of getting on a 30-minute call and riffing about it.
Yeah, I like that. So I've found, and I'm not trying to say I'm important or anything, but my face is in a lot of places. So I tend to get people who want time with me. And I would say what I prioritize first is like sales and customers. Yeah. And then everything else is if I can make time for it. And I do get a lot of like the ancillary, hey, love your personality, love what I've been seeing, would be great to like just get to better know each other kind of calls from people that are, in my network or second degree connections. And I'm very appreciative of it. But to your point, if I say yes to all of those, I like can't actually do anything productive or meaningful. And one of the things, I probably shouldn't tip my hand on this, but after I kind of suss out like what do they actually want to discuss, if it does not warrant a call in my estimation, one of my techniques is I say, hey, I'm really slammed for the next, insert time frame. Can you reach back out to me in, 2 months, 3 months? Yeah. And we might be able to, it might be better timing then. And what I've found, quite honestly, is 98% of those people don't reach back out 3-ish months later. So, I'm not trying to be mean about it. It's just like, I think we're probably both protecting our times if whatever you wanted to talk about is not important enough that you don't remember to follow up on it.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I do that too quite a bit. Like I'd just be like, hey, just really swamped right now with parenting or house shifting and this and that. And like, so most people, yeah, like they just sort of forget. But I think what I've also realized is sometimes I just sort of, so this is maybe one more step. It's maybe a slightly more rude. I'm not proud about it, but just a lot of times I just don't reply to folks. And sort of in the sense like when somebody's asking for a meeting, I'm like I just don't have the time right now. So I don't even reply. And I've usually seen like, like if it's not sort of brought up again, it's not important. But if it's sort of, like there's this thing called rule of 7 that was taught to me, right? If you got to sort of make a point, you will reach out again, right? So if somebody continuously keeps asking, then it's like, okay, this is something that's probably important. Most times when you just sort of say no and it's sort of, you put it to the back burner, it'll just never come back up again. So, yeah.
So let's transition now and start to talk about, your journey in your career. You've accomplished a lot over the span of your career, which is not it's not crazy long career either. In just like, I would say like several years, you've been head of marketing at Bonsai. You have been head of marketing at WeFlow. You also separately run your own consultancy called Early Stage Marketing, right? Where you're basically building GTM playbooks. And that's on top of being head of marketing at StoryLane. So kind of talk through like, what was your journey to getting to StoryLane?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career sort of wanting to build my own company, and then I didn't really know how. So I joined a startup because like I got the advice that you could sort of just learn just get exposed to a bunch of parts of the business. So like right out of college, I joined like a startup, and it was like a 3-person startup. Best learning experience in like the 1 year. I was doing sales, I was doing marketing, I was doing customer support, I was doing product road mapping. So when you sort of get exposed to all of those things, right? I think it was just more like I was always sort of trying to understand how the business is working. It sort of runs in our family in the sense like it's so funny that like we go to a restaurant and then we'd appreciate the food and then we'd be like, what are the economics of this place, and then you sort of it's just it's a weird thing, like I just sort of enjoy. So even in my companies that I've been with, I was always like trying to sort of understand just like how everything sort of connects together. And then somewhere along the way I sort of read some advice that hey, maybe I should start sharing some of the learnings. So I started blogging. It was like over 10 years back. And I think it was Andrew Shen who had said that it was the most scalable networking activity you can. It's a lot better than just sort of meaningless networking at conferences and all that. So I started writing and I got connected to a bunch of people. And that's why the whole sort of sharing journey sort of got me to the next sort of roles, including StoryLane. So StoryLane came as a client for early stage marketing and then sort of expanded into just a full-time role. Yeah, just a bunch of like things related to that sort of just connecting together got me to StoryLane. Yeah.
I gave a very brief explanation at the top of this about StoryLane, but can you tell our listeners what is StoryLane?
Yeah, it's a interactive demo software. So this is a category that sort of came up about 3 years ago, which is basically like, when you have like these product tutorial videos that sit on your website, it's a very sort of passive experience for your buyer. You sort of just, you're just sort of, you have to go through a single narrative, watch like a 5-minute video. And I think buyers' requirements are changing and they want to just see the parts that they care about. They want to see the product before they talk to sales. And we're just getting a lot of feedback. So we basically created like a a technology that you could sort of replicate your front end without it being connected to your back end. So it's basically like it looks and feels exactly like a product, but now you have like, users and buyers can just sort of explore around it without signing up, without writing credit card details, without actually talking to sales, and then, deciding if they want to move forward or not.
Okay. So now let's use that backdrop to get into really what we're here today to talk about. So this notion of using your product to sell your product, you touched on it a little bit up front, but like practically, what does that really mean?
Yeah. So I think for us, it's more like interactive demos there's a lot of knowledge gap that's in like, it's a new category. It's very few people know about it. And obviously the awareness is increasing, but there's also not a lot of data that's available. What's working, what's not working. There's not a lot of best practice that are available, what's working, what's not working, right? So we got to sort of uncover that and share that with the world. So that was basically like, okay, let's just test out interact demos on the website. And then through the website, we sort of collected some data points. We're like, okay, how does it affect the, deal size, like the deal closure time, right? Or how does it improve conversion rates and all that, right? And then sort of form some best practices and sort of do that. Then we tested it out at events, right? And see, how is it working as a pattern interrupt and like across, conferences. And of course, and like, for example, there was another one, that was a big one last year we tried was, we basically sort of just tried it in search traffic, and it was just one of the most viral things we've ever done, where we just sort of grew our traffic from 20,000 to like 220,000 a month in like less than 6 months. And it was just like, these are all playbooks that are uncovering about the category. And the more we sort of use it internally, the more we share it, the more obviously, like prospects have, a certain idea that, okay, these are different ways we can use it. Because there's also another thing that people sort of ask is like, okay, I know what interact demo software is, and I know I'll put it on my website, but how else can I use it? Where else can I use it? And we got to sort of educate them about it.
So this sort of approach has enabled scale, but if we walk it back a little bit, you actually wrote in a post recently when you were kind of recapping that last 3 years journey, you were 900K and then you were 8 million, but you said, hey, 50K to 250K is not the same as growing from 2 million to 10 million. One is early traction. The other is scale. How would you so aside from the nomenclature, how would you characterize sort of the work behind 50 to 250K versus the work behind 2 million to 10 million?
Yeah, absolutely. So 50 to 250K is a lot of sort of narrowing down who your ICP is, making assumptions, right? Looking for predictability in terms of who is buying, where the traffic is coming. It's a lot of, I would say, founder-led at that stage. I personally never recommend anyone, a marketer to sort of join at that stage, because you're still sort of figuring it out. So it's a lot around like, how can we do 100 things and just sort of get customers? And out of the 100 customers we get, what sort of predictable patterns are we seeing, which sort of kind of start building like a skeleton for your GTM motion as you sort of scale. When you are, start at like whatever, 1 million, 2 million at that stage, right? That's when you sort of have the predictability. You have a very clear understanding about your ICP. You have a very clear understanding of how you're different from others, right? So now it's not about, okay, how do we continue to sort of, refine our ICP and all that, but now it's more about how do we, 10x this predictability. That's what you're sort of looking at. So at that point, you start cutting out channels. You've tried 100 things. What are the 2 or 3 things that'll get you to 10 million? Like, I'll give you an example. So when I joined StoryLane, I think we were at about 2 million, I would say. And my founder was just like, he came to me and he's like, listen, we've grown till here, 2 million, about 1.5 years. But I don't know how we'll get to 10 million. Can you help us get there? And then we started having like a bunch of conversations. This is what we could do. This is what we could not do. And through that, we sort of, I think through those 3-4 conversations, we sort of got an idea that, okay, this is the path to 10 million and beyond, right? And that's when sort of I decided that, okay, I'll join StoryLane full time. So yeah, that's the main difference, I would say, in terms of like early traction and scale.
It's almost why, to me, this actually justifies this technique that I teach founders, specifically in the fundraising process, which is, it's this technique I call the revenue engine technique, as you're talking to investors and kind of positioning your traction. If you are 20K MRR, if you're making money, but you're at 20K MRR or less, probably you could stretch it to about 30K MRR, and this will still work. I advise you actually position yourself as a pre-revenue company, for the reason that in the eyes of the investor, if you say we're post-revenue and we're doing 12K, 15K MRR, now the only questions are, why aren't you doing more than that? Versus, and the reason I'm saying, to me, it's not lying to say you're a pre-revenue company, because the definition needs to shift. Post-revenue doesn't mean making money. Post-revenue means we have unlocked our revenue engine. Because in that climb to 20 and 30K MRR, 99% or more of those companies don't actually know how they're making money. Maybe they went to a conference last month and they got a bunch of interest, but that's not repeatable the next month. Maybe they tested a paid ad and that seemed to work, but now it's pettering out. So the idea here is you say we're making money while in pre-revenue mode, which is kind of being like, hey, we're not even trying to make money yet, and we are. That's showing market interest. Versus we're post-revenue and we're 14K MRR. Now it actually looks like people don't really want your product.
I love that. Yeah, this is actually, 100%. I think it's more like also like if you sort of underplay where you're at, you're obviously a lot more like, oh, you're actually doing fairly well, right? But if you sort of over exaggerate, you're sort of, yeah, but this is actually great. Yeah, I love it. Pre-revenue is probably the best way to say it, 100%.
Now, as we talk about that initial sort of go-to-market, that initial launch strategy, I just want to turn to our listeners for a second, because if that's where you're at and you're trying to figure out how do we grow our product, how do we scale our product, then you're probably in this situation, like so many other founders are, where the people who are looking at you think your life as a founder is a lot of yacht parties, fast cars, and fine dining, right? Everyone else thinks that's startup life, but as founders, we know it's way more like late nights, public transit, and ramen noodles. And the reality is building a disruptive product is grossly underestimated and requires this rare combination of skill and experience. But you really never know what you're going to get with an offshore development team. That moonlighter who said they're good for it is ghosting. And accelerators will teach, but they're not going to build for you. At the end of the day, it just kind of feels like everyone who can help wants money or equity or both. And any wrong decision just puts the launch totally at risk, but not anymore, because we've got friends and they go by the name of Code Launch, and they're here to help you lift off. Code Launch is the only equity-free accelerator, pitch competition, and exposure platform, all wrapped into a venturetainment spectacle. If you get selected into their program, you get free software development from top-tier teams. You get to pitch and demo your product on a live stage to hundreds of stakeholders, and you compete to secure an investment on the spot. And all of that is provided totally fee-free. When you make moves with Code Launch, you're closer to turning those not invites today into actual yacht invites tomorrow. So if you want to join the likes of Cara Corder, Endora, Materia, Bioworks, all companies and more who have lifted off with the help of Code Launch, here's what you do. You can go and apply at codelaunch.com. But if you want to have your application fast-tracked for review, if you want to cut the line, then you need to go to the special link that's in this episode description specifically for fans and friends of Startup Hype Man and the Goat to Market show. It's codelaunch.com is the main URL. But again, if you want to cut the line with your application and have it reviewed ahead of everyone else, use the link that's in the episode show notes below. All right, back to our conversation now with Madhav Bhandari, the head of marketing at StoryLane. We're talking about how they're using their product to sell their product and ultimately this scale journey they've been on over the last few years. Now, in this scale process, you're saying like 2 to 10 is like, hey, you've kind of zeroed in on some specific channels that are working, and now you're doubling down on those. I'm curious, what kind of metrics do you look at per channel to decide? And what's the time frame of a test to be like, hey, this is working, but this is not working?
Yeah. So, I mean, just for a sort of, maybe I'll give you a full picture. So I'm definitely responsible for, in the sense like revenue. Like my founder has the conversations like, hey, if let's say we weren't sort of, if we were to do the same things again, right, from last year to this year, right, we will like the product has a virality component to it. It'll continue to grow, right? What sort of an incremental growth can marketing sort of add to it in terms of revenue? And that's what we're here for, like the marketing team at StoryLane, like how do we add the incremental revenue on top of it? So as a primary KPI, of course, revenue is definitely linked to my performance, but also as a team, we look at sales qualified leads. We don't look at MQLs. Primarily, like, if sales is qualified, right, only then it sort of counts. And then underneath that, there's, I think one is like on a very broader level, we always look at like, okay, how are the, SQL sort of growing? And like, if you look at like, basically like the incremental revenue that we've added versus the expense. And as long as we're sort of profitable and growing at the pace we're at, things are going well. Because the thing is that on a channel level, it's really, really hard, especially if you have got like, large sort of account size deals, because I'll tell you why. You might have a deal, they'll see a LinkedIn ad, and then they go to a Slack community, and then they see a podcast ad, like the one that you just did. And then, they'll just see an ad, and they'll see, get recommended in a dinner somewhere. So, what do you sort of give attribution for, right? Like there's influence from a lot of different channels. That's why the whole sort of concept of multi threading is, right? So so we know that, like there's a bunch of channels that sort of have an influence, and it is just impossible to sort of solve the whole attribution thing. So what we'll basically look at is this three metrics how we look at how a channel is performing. One is, for example, simple thing is we look at the source of website traffic. So you just go into Google Analytics, see, are we getting from LinkedIn, social, Google, whatever, right? That's your first checkpoint. The second checkpoint is we have a how did you hear about us question in our demo form. That's like a subjective sort of view, right? So they'll say, oh, we've come from LinkedIn or ChatGPT or Google or whatever, right? So that'll be like a second checkpoint. And then the third checkpoint is when sales is actually talking to them, right? Through the calls that they have until a deal closes. We basically, we use a tool called Crane, which actually has like transcripts, right? And then we basically have a AI agent sort of set up there that will actually analyze the transcript and see if anywhere if they've mentioned how they heard about us, we'll sort of fill that as a custom field inside HubSpot for that particular deal. So we've got these three checkpoints from the start to the finish. And there we sort of get some sort of a directional data that, okay, this, we're getting, let's say 50% of our, deals closed from LinkedIn, right? So, whatever investments we're doing there, it is working. It is sort of driving pipeline, right? Let's say we're working with an influencer and, their name pops up somewhere, right? It is working, right? And then for a channel specific attribution, it's different for every channel, right? For LinkedIn ads, for example, we have like influence revenue. And so we use a tool called Fibbler that allows us to get that influence revenue number. And we just try to sort of, just check the return on ad spend based on the influence revenue. With influencers, it's, like how do you hear about us, and through sales calls. It's different for every channel, but it is never measured in the sense like we don't expect our buyers to have a linear path. They won't like see a blog and then just pay us $50,000 a year, right? Like that's not going to happen. And and like my CEO and I are sort of aligned on that.
You've had some interesting like tests as well, like different channels that you've done, which I would say like a company who's choosing to not be aggressive or play it safe isn't going to do some of these things. So like influencer program, conferences, not just showing up at a conference or having a booth, but like pulling up a coffee, like a barista station at a conference, or stationing a mobile, like a truck with your ad on it right outside, like parking that outside the conference. Kind of, what was that almost like a war room like in saying, hey, we're going to do this at the conference instead of just a normal booth? Because I love those ideas and executions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I'm a big believer, like for me, the word of the last 365 days is pattern interrupts. Like we just use it. I use it in everything. You probably overhear this from me, but I generally feel that everybody's just going through the same track. Everybody's doing a booth at a conference, and everybody's sort of like everybody has the same playbook, right? And if you've got to really stand out, whether that's in your category or as a brand in B2B SaaS, you just got to be different. You got to take bold bets. And one of the benefits of sort of working with a product that has a high deal value is that you have room to make bets. So sometimes you might sort of spend a little bit and then it doesn't work. That's fine because we've budgeted for it, right? It's not possible when you're sort of at like $300 a month. That's purely performance led because I've done that. So I think it's just that, like, we make bold bets. There's going to be, I mean, I can tell you a gazillion ones that actually didn't sort of do well, but the ones that do just, like just does insanely well, right? For example, the truck was like, the whole goal with that was how do we get to 200 of the 200 attendees? And that was not going to happen through the booth at a conference. It had to be a truck there, right? The coffee shop was like another way. Like, how do we get to everybody at the conference? Everybody wants coffee. And, and then we also added some latte art on it. So again, like these are things you wouldn't normally see. And it works pretty well for us.
Well, and those lattes, everyone who gets one is probably taking a photo of it, probably posting it, right?
Exactly.
Not just on like their social, but they're probably sending it to like in their family group chat too. Not that, I mean, and you don't know if one of those family members happens to work in the industry, right? So it's kind of like that permeation of multiple layers in the process. On the influencer side of things, so I have been engaged for a handful of influencer deals in the past. The ones that have worked well, they have understood upfront it's a long-term play, and there is not scrutiny over individual results of content. The ones that haven't worked out so well, which, through trial and error, I kind of know moving forward to say no. But the ones that haven't worked out well is when there's like hard metrics that have to be met in the first like 2-3 months. Because I think it fundamentally misaligns with the concept of influence. You don't build influence overnight. So can you kind of, with that backdrop, I guess my question is, how are you approaching the influencer strategy? What are your expectations of them, and how are you supporting them in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So we basically sort of track. So apart from the ways that I just mentioned, like, do we see them? How do you hear about us? One thing that we also track very heavily is how are our brand searches on Google sort of growing. So here's an interesting stat, right? The day we had the coffee sort of cup installation, right? That day we had the highest brand searches, way more than even the number of people at the conference. It probably reached a lot more people than that, right? So
you probably did get into those group chats then.
So it's just so that's the that's the thing that we're also looking at, the influencers, right? We're not. It'll be amazing if we see them. How do you hear about us? But I think it's more around like, how do we sort of get associated in that group that they sort of they've built over time, and then also sort of see how many of those actually go in and search for StoryLane, right? Does it have an impact? So we've had campaigns where there was just, I know for a fact, like that day the post went out, we saw like a huge surge in brand searches. So that, that way it's good. But I'll also tell you this, that I think, the 80-20 rule works with the influencer content, right? Like if you've signed like a year-long deal, there'll be 2 months that will contribute about 80% of the sort of results you'd get. And there'd be 10 months, which is like sort of average, right? But to get to those 2 months, you got to go through those 10 months. So that's been our sort of learning, right? But how do you know who to commit for like a year for? So that's why we have like a 3-month pilot. The 3-month pilot isn't to see like how much impressions are they able to get and all. That's maybe 1 second, or that's definitely a factor we look at, like in terms of the quality of reach and the quantity of reach, dependent on like each profile. But I think the more important thing is, can they write or can they create content that actually resonates with their audience in the way we want to sort of position ourselves, right? There's a lot of influencers that might not even be able to get what demo automation is. And that's pretty evidently clear by the end of that 3-month pilot. So at the end of 3 months, we sort of decide, do we sign a year deal or we just cancel things out? If anybody crosses beyond 3 months, we sign a year-long deal with them.
Got it. So you are looking for, does it seem like they grasp the concept here? You're not necessarily looking for, has it generated 15 leads in the 2-3 months?
No. Yeah, I
think that's a really smart approach. I like that. I think I've decided this episode will actually not so much be using your product to sell your product, but it's the theme of this episode is actually pattern interrupt marketing. Now, with that idea of pattern interrupts, for everyone who's listening on the Go-to-Market show, you may or may not know this is a property of Startup Hype Man. And if you're not yet familiar with Startup Hype Man, it kind of aligns with this idea of pattern interrupts, because at the end of the day, vision is the big word. Every great company, every great CEO, every great founder has one or should have a vision. But there's a huge difference between the vision as a company leader you might want to project versus what actually gets said. And that's true whether you're a founder trying to raise your seed or Series A round, get your first set of real customers, or you're running a scaling venture and you've got a sales team out there that has to evangelize your message. The vision gets cloudy really quick. Now, you can hack it together on your own, and that leads to 20 versions of a message or a deck that you might still not like. Advisors really can't dig in the way you want them to, and agencies really do not understand that CEO mindset. When the stakes are this high, every interaction counts. You can't come off sheepish or like a sly fox. And the goal is become a unicorn. But I say, don't just go to market if you want to be a unicorn. Instead, become the GOAT to market. And that's where Startup Hype Man comes in. So whether that's figuring out your 60-second elevator pitch to your full go-to-market narrative or your fundraising narrative or running a sales training, what we're doing is channeling your vision into a real message and a real story that you will actually say and put out there so that your audience recognizes you not just as the best, but the only option in your market. You can learn more, of course, at startuphypeman.com. But the question is, why be a unicorn when you can be the GOAT? And today, again, on the Go-to-Market Show, we're with Madhav Bhandari from StoryLane. As we start to wind down, I've got a couple questions here before we hit our wrap-up, Madhav. The idea of the pattern interrupt. I think a lot of people will hear that and be like, oh, okay, all right, we need to do something that like makes us go viral, quote unquote. But could you like maybe give an example of what is something that is not pattern interrupt, but someone might think they're doing a pattern interrupt versus kind of the things you've said before with the latte art and the truck billboard outside the conference, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. So a simple example is if you've ever gone to any website and you see this comparison page with your competitor, and it'll be like all green checks on you and all red crosses on the competitor, right? That's clearly everybody's doing that. The buyers know.
Yes.
They call that shit out, right? So and everybody's doing that, and so your sort of call is like, hey, what if we break that pattern and actually just share what's the real thing? Here's what they're good at, what our competitor is good at, what they're bad at, what we're good at, what we're bad at, right? And then when somebody sees a comparison page, they'll be like, oh, this is differently, like this is a pattern interrupt. This is how you sort of do that. And the funny thing is when you start actually looking at your whole GTM motion, you'll just realize that there's just so many patterns to be, broken. For example, everybody's doing webinars. Traditionally, they'd have 3 people and sort of, just riff on a topic, pre-decided questions, all of that, right? What if you just, sort of ditch that concept and did like some sort of a, I don't know, competitive show, for example, right? You could, take the same content, but just repurpose it in a different format. Like, for example, we did like this whole award show, but instead of doing like a top 30 and a 30, we just sort of took the Office theme and created it into a Dundies. So now that's like a pattern interrupt, right? So it's just, it just look for patterns where it just things are just going on as it is and see where you can break it or interrupt it.
4 years ago, well, I'll tell you, my first foray was probably 7 years ago now. In 2018, it was a very homemade video in my garden unit office apartment. I literally just put my webcam on and I was standing in the back and I redid the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air theme song, but about my company's services. And then I used that in a prospecting campaign and it worked really well, getting meetings and ultimately driving revenue. In fact, I could probably point to that video, not just the existence of the video, but the ways I was able to use it across different touch points. I could probably point to that video alone driving about, or being the original source of about $200K of revenue over like 2 years, or maybe 3 years. And then in 2021, I did a parody of the song Stan by Eminem. And it was called Carl, and it was about an SDR who named Carl who couldn't get his prospect to reply to an outreach. That also, got tons of views, got tons of inbound leads as well. And then I was able to use that as part of an outbound sequence as well. Now those are and then, I've also created a complete rap album that's not parody, but reality, and serves as content marketing for the business, but it also just is in and of itself a hip hop album that is accessible by the world. Now those are very intense creative endeavors. Do you believe, and even to your point, like demo Dundies, things of that nature, I think StoryLane has also even done its own parody rap music video before. Does pattern interrupt require deep creative expertise or execution, or can pattern interrupt be if you don't have all those creative resources on hand, can you effectively achieve a pattern interrupt?
So I used to think that you need a lot of sort of creative horsepower in your team to be able to do that. But when I came across that term pattern interrupt, it just became so easy to find those interrupts. You don't need a creative team. You can just sort of there's just so many people that are doing it at like literally like, a $5 a month or like a $10 a month Canva subscription, and sort of are able to get a lot more sort of than just like, a webinar that takes like 4 weeks to set up and whatever, right? You definitely don't need more budget. You don't definitely need a lot of creative thing. You just got to be willing to sort of think different, try different, and, have that sort of mindset that if it's going to work well, it's going to go really, really well. If it's not going to work well, that's fine. Like, it's still going to sort of perform the same way as your sort of usual, stuff that would go out, right? So no, like absolutely, you can just do it with the lowest budget possible.
The one thing I will say, if a company's going to foray into doing like branded music, let's say, and I say this as, a very experienced hip hop artist and also a marketer and a founder. If you're going to do that, and specifically if it's going to be rap, whoever your rapper is, whether it's someone at your company, whether it is someone you bring on outside, that person has to have actual flow. I have seen a lot of companies create parody rap content, and the rapper, again, it might be someone at the company, maybe it's the founder of the company or whatever, but like there's no flow behind the lyrics. Like they might be like on point with the content that they're trying to like create, meaning like the message behind it and the empathy they create with the audience because of that. But the likes, the good jobs that you're getting are like, those are charity likes. People are like, oh, that's cute. You tried that. Like, good for you. But they don't actually enjoy it themselves. They're just like, they don't want to be like mean about telling you that it's not good. So that's the one thing I would say is if you do that, like make it so the rap itself is not this like, oh, that's cute. Like you don't want charity likes. You want people who actually think it's so good. And this kind of bleeds into whatever method you're doing or whatever channel you're doing or execution you're doing. What you call pattern interrupt is probably what I call can't sleep content. And can't sleep content is this term that I thought of, after doing these kinds of executions several times over, it just kind of came to my mind that like, this is can't sleep content. And what that means is the output, the thing is so interesting, compelling, unique, or different, insert whatever adjective you want, but it's so that the person who consumes it can't go to sleep that night until they have shown it to someone else. It's kind of like in the same way for any basketball fan, if like Steph Curry hits an amazing three and you see that clip, you default send it to like your 3 closest basketball fan friends. You don't watch it and you're like, oh, that was cute. And then you put it away. You have to get it out of your system that someone else sees this too. And that's what I think kind of the standard of the bar here is with a lot of these executions is, can you get it to that can't sleep mode where someone physically like cannot go up, like whether it's at night or whether it's during the day, like, you can expand the term can't sleep to mean like they can't do the next thing in their day until they know other people have seen it, whether that is directly text messaging it to people, whether it's putting it in their company Slack, whether it is reposting it themselves, right? They functionally cannot go about their day until they know other people have seen this too. That I think it's a high bar, but it's the bar you want to set for yourself.
I love that. Yeah. And it happens to me all the time, right? Like when I see something, I'm like, if it's something great, like I gotta share it with my colleague. I gotta share it with like somebody for sure. Like, I mean, like my LinkedIn share thing is just like, it's my favorite button. Whenever I see something, I'm like, I gotta share this. So yeah, it's actually a good way to reframe this 100%. Yeah.
So last question here before we hit our wrap up. Let's say they're in that $50K, $250K, $1 million climb. They don't have the huge budget yet. Can they run a pattern interrupt play?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like I said earlier, it's just so many pattern interrupts to break, right? Like, even with, for example, whether that's your ad creative or whether that's the way you sort of, like, here's another example, right? There's like a gazillion companies that will do, but they're not going to be transparent with their revenue numbers and something, right? if you do that, you're already breaking pattern. It doesn't matter what revenue you're at. Like, that's another sort of entrap. Like, there's just, I mean, if you sit down with me in 5 minutes, I can give you like 50 pattern interrupts, like immediately in your GTM. So it's not that hard. You just gotta be like, one thing you just gotta commit is like, hey, we're gonna do things differently. And as long as you've got that mindset, and as long as you're sort of looking for those things, it doesn't require budget. It just requires a mindset shift. That's all.
Let's begin our wrap up now. First off, Madhav, where can our listeners find you? Where can they find StoryLane? Where can they learn more?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for my name. I'm pretty active there. StoryLane, you can just go to storylane.io, StoryLane. It's not like, there's a lot of people that say it's like Storyline, but it's StoryLane. Yeah.
Who is one person you want to give a shout out to who's been helpful in your journey?
Okay. Wow, that's a big one. I would definitely give a big shout out to Sanchar. He used to be the former VP. So his name is Sanchar Shaheen. He was a former VP of marketing at Typeform and Hotstar, and currently runs he runs a mental health company. It's called Oliva Health. And yeah, I basically was mentoring with him for about 6 months. I was in a pretty challenging sort of marketing leadership phase, and the way he just sort of reframed the way I sort of looked at things, it was just it's something that even 5 years down the line I just keep looking back to. He was just, that 6 months was one of the best learning years of my career so far.
Let's now give our final top 1 or 2 lessons or takeaways for the listeners based on today's discussion. Now the theme became pattern interrupt, so we'll go off of that. So today's conversation really was around pattern interrupt marketing. I'll go first and I'll toss it to you. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think for me, the biggest takeaway I have is understanding what you can or should execute based on the stage that you're at. So if you're still in that up to 250K climb or whatever that number is, you're still trying to just, as you say, you're trying to narrow down who the hell is your ICP.
Yeah.
So don't try and do all these advanced plays that work at 5 million. Focus on what it takes to understand the right ICP versus when you're later on, you focus on optimizing your channels. Pattern interrupt marketing, top lesson or takeaway for the listeners, Madhav.
Yeah, I think it was less, I'm just sort of thinking, I really like the can't sleep content sort of, because I can actually relate to it. Like when I see something, I'm just like, I cannot sleep, or I cannot sort of go back to sort of a meeting until I actually share it with somebody I know. Like, I mean, even if it's sometimes just sharing it so that I record it somewhere, So
Yeah.
100%, I think that's a good one.
My final question, which is how we end every episode of this show, fill in the blank. Entrepreneurship is blank.
Entrepreneurship is a game of risk management. Because I feel like, yeah, for me, I mean, I think the way I think about it is that there is different level of risk appetite and tolerance and your ability to sort of deal with it. And that sort of builds your GTM motion in the way you build product, the way you build the company, right? Even like, when I've worked with a bunch of founders, like contrasting personalities, sometimes there's like a high risk, high reward sort of a strategy. It's not like everything will work. It's just everybody has a different sort of tolerance level for risk, right? But one thing's for certain, right? You just got to be sort of playful with risk. You've got to be sort of okay when, things don't go well. You can't just sort of go in damage control. You just got to figure out how you can do risk management, whether that's reducing the risk in your portfolio or whether that's just being okay or like having a budget for the risk. For me, that's the most important thing in entrepreneurship.
Risk management. I like that. We have not had that response before. Listeners, did you listen to this and have questions for Madhav along the way? And you couldn't answer them because obviously you were not live with him. But we've got a chance for you to be live with him because the first week this episode airs, Madhav is hopping into Goat to Market Club. That's our online member community, where he's going to be doing a Reddit-style Ask Me Anything. So if you want to ask him more about pattern interrupts, if you want to ask him more about his conference execution strategy, if you want to unpack their paid ad strategy, which we didn't even get to talk about today, if you want to ask him about his tips as a new dad or time management, all of these are fair game. It's an Ask Me Anything that's going to go live the first week that this episode airs. If you are not a member of our online community, go ahead and head to startuphypeman.com/GTM club, startuphypeman.com/GTM-club. It is the Goat to Market show and the Goat to Market Club online Ask Me Anything with Madhav. Madhav, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you responding to my relatively cold outreach to be on the show. I had a wonderful time talking to you, and we'll catch you soon on the AMA.
Thank you, Rajiv. It was wonderful. Yeah, lovely conversation.
That'll put a bow on this one. Before we head out of here, a couple quick housekeeping items. Number one, did you like what you heard? Well, give us a subscribe and a follow. Maybe share it with one friend who you think would find this valuable. Number two, remember that Ask Me Anything I told you about at the end of the episode? That goes down exclusively inside of Goat to Market Club, our online founder and startup community. And you can access it for free. And your membership is 100% free at startuphypeman.com/GTM-club. Number three, need pitch help? Startup Hype Man is your man. Whether it's a fundraising narrative or a go-to-market or category narrative, we've got you covered to make sure you have messaging that doesn't help you just go to market, but of course, what? Helps you become the GOAT to market. All right, we will see you next week here on the Goat to Market show. Thank you for listening. And remember, why be a unicorn when you can be the GOAT?